Hi, this is Artifacts of Mars. In part one of Noah's Ark Examined, we looked at the racial aspects, how what we have today in the way of races really could not have come from 8 people on a boat. Today we're going to look at part two, the hottest blood of all is in the sea. I'm not sure where that saying comes from. It obviously refers to whales. Uh, So what would have happened if the whole Earth had been flooded like this? What would have happened to the creatures in the ocean? I don't want to hear, oh, they'd be okay, they're in water, blah, blah, blah. No, they wouldn't be okay. The reason is, if you flooded the whole Earth the way the Bible says, I mean, really deep water, most of life in the ocean would have perished. Why? Well, there's a couple different factors here, obviously more than two, but I'm going to do two different factors here. Factor one is the fact that ocean salinity would have been gone. I mean, destroyed. Uh, Essentially. Because the water is coming from the sky, it's fresh water, right? There's no mention of where it came from. But the point here is that every creature in the ocean, I don't care whether it's a whale or a shark, cuttlefish, they depend on the salinity. They depend on a number of different factors, obviously. But, Shamu there at SeaWorld, Shamu has to have salt water. If they put Shamu in fresh water, it would die. It's just not adapted to fresh water, as simple as that. The Christian Bible doesn't talk about the whales and the sharks and the myriads of other sea creatures that will be dependent on having a saline, saltwater environment. Why do you think that is? So I think some things are being left out. Eventually I will get to that. Not in this part. I'm going to just examine what's in the sea. It's not to mention even sea snakes, for instance, and just myriads and myriads of creatures. Most of these creatures depend on saline, salt water, like I said, and that would have been severely diluted. Most of them would have died. Plankton would have died as well. So the story couldn't be exactly as told. There would have had to have been some sort of survival mechanism that could have protected different creatures from the effects of not having any salt water. And basically they would have been taken out and probably cryogenically frozen or something like that. But we have another problem yet. Most creatures in the sea also rely on a certain pressure. For example, the coelacanth is a prime example of an animal that requires a certain pressure. If you bring one of those creatures up to sea level, it dies. Remember, the coelacanth is the fish that the scientists told us was extinct, and then we find out that some fishermen, I forget where it was, down South America or something, they've been catching them all along, catching this so-called extinct fish. They don't like it, it's oily, you can't eat it, it's ugly, but it exists. And it depends on a certain pressure. It has to have very high pressure. Some animals have to have very low pressure. So the simple fact of the matter is, no. This flood would have wiped out virtually all life in the ocean. Whether it's salinity or pressure. And freshwater fishes, I don't believe, freshwater critters, I don't believe would have fared much better. They're relying on pressure too. You know, some of them, like, for instance, the obvious salmon. Salmon go from freshwater to saltwater wouldn't be a problem for them, specifically, probably. You know, a fish like that might be able to survive, but many of them would have simply perished. Uh, Trout and bass have to have specific breeding grounds. I've caught trout before. This whole area around here in Finger Lakes is famous for its trout fishing. But most of them would have died too. So somebody, if you believe Noah's Ark story, somebody had to preserve them, and it wasn't in a rickety old wooden boat either. They were using high-tech equipment far superior to anything we have today. I'm Artifacts Mars, and in part 3 we're going to examine those things that creep and crawl and sting and so forth. What would have happened to them? Thanks for viewing.